Aloha, everybody. I'm Eva Andrade, and on this episode of the Triple F podcast, Faith and Family First, we're going to be talking about the case of the disappearing comments. So you want to stick around for that. Let's chat about that. Aloha, Jim Hochberg. How are you doing today?
Hey, Eva Andrade.
All right. So, Jim, you and I have encouraged people consistently over the past several months to submit comments on Title IX, right? Because of the regulations that they've been working on. And we were both not surprised when suddenly thousands upon thousands of submitted comments went poof into the air.
I was surprised. It's not supposed to be like that. I wasn't surprised when I realized who's in charge, but it's really not supposed to be like that.
And it's really interesting because so many people, when they're getting excited about these kind of issues, when they decide that they're going to weigh into these kind of issues, it is not a very good thing for their comment to disappear in this type of a manner, because people begin to, well, I wouldn't even say people begin. People distrust the government. And this is just one more time that they're going to be slapped upside the head with distrust toward the government.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And unfortunately, it could drive some people away from owning their share of the government process, which we always tell everybody: you own the government. You've got to vote. You've got to know who's running for office. You got to help find good candidates because it's your government. It's not something extra that you just show up on election day and cast a ballot. There's a whole ownership that goes in with it. And when this kind of a thing happens and they don't care about it, I mean, it's if they were like falling over crying and in sorrow that they lost these comments, it wouldn't be so bad, but they don't care.
Let's back up a little bit to something that's very near and dear to your heart. And we've talked about this on other shows, but I want to pull it home right now because we know that our listeners and viewers are Christian. We know that most of our viewers, I would assume, read the Bible, they pray, they go to church, they listen to their pastors, they plug in to their rights and responsibilities as a Christian. But I think sometimes Christians pull themselves back from politics because they're just tired of the negativity. They're tired of getting beat up. They feel like their voices don't matter. But I know that in the past, you've really encouraged Christian believers to get involved in politics. You talk about it being their government, but even more than that, isn't it what Christ calls us to do in our relationship with him? We are almost compelled to get involved in politics.
Well, it's very clear that we're to pray for the people in power because the Lord put them there. So it totally makes sense to me that if the Lord is going to put them there, we should be working on campaigns of people running, or we should run ourselves. And I'm not saying that the Lord is going to tell you, run for mayor and he's going to make you mayor, but you don't have to campaign. That's not what I'm talking about. I've had people tell me that before.
Well, because some people feel that if God calls you to it, he's going to pull you through it, right? That's the saying.
Sure.
If God calls you to it, he's going to pull you through it. So basically, I'm going to sit in my basement and run for president and get elected.
Correct. Which can happen if the press is on your side.
But in
that's
Hawaii.
what happened to Biden. But,
in Hawaii.
But to get back to what you're saying, yes, we're called to pray for our leaders because the Lord puts them in power and can take them out of power. But in the Old Testament, Jethro said, pick for yourself able-bodied men that hate bribes because you can't do all the work yourself. So we're actually given a description of who to vote for. And the thing that drives me crazy is when the ballot comes out and people call me and say, who should I vote for? Either I don't know who any of these people are or I don't like them. And my response should be, and sometimes it is, why are you waiting until your paper's due to start working on it? I mean, remember when we were in school and the teacher gave a long-term research writing assignment and the weekend before, you're trying to come up with something to turn in because
Yep.
you did nothing.
Yep.
Why are we doing that with our voting?
And it's obvious that that happened, Jim, because you and I talked on the last show about the census. And we talked about how many people are actually eligible to vote in the state of Hawaii and how many people actually voted in the primary election.
But still, that's a different issue, because if they all started at the end of the last election cycle and they started finding good candidates, started helping good candidates with their ground game and their financing game and their substantive issues game, and they worked on it the whole time, I would much rather have half the people vote that are eligible if that's the kind of voters they are.
And can we just talk for a minute about giftedness? Because I think that sometimes what happens is you get someone who's passionate about doing it, right? They may or may not be called of the Lord to do it, but they're passionate, right? They really want to make a difference, but maybe they're not gifted in that way. You have to be a certain type of person to run for office and actually make it into office and then be a good statesman.
Based on who's in our legislature?
Well, no. I'm talking Jim, I'm talking about the overall, again, going back to
in the
point.
Best of all possible worlds, because again, as Voltaire would say.
Right. And again, we're talking to our big base, which is the Christian faith-based base, right? So you get people that are like, oh, God's calling me to do this. And they jump in, and then maybe they are called, but going back to what you said, maybe they don't have the right people lining up with them to help them cross that finish line. Maybe they don't have the funding to get it done. So these are things that they may experience. But I'm talking about people that run sometimes that may not be called to run. And then they end up on the ticket and people are like, there's no way I'm voting for this person. And you and I know this because we've talked about this. We get the phone calls from people that go, why aren't you voting for this person? Or why, first of all, as a 501c3, I'm never going to tell people who to vote for. I cannot do that. But even if I could, I wouldn't, because I think it's each person's responsibility to find out if the person running is the right person and if they should get their vote.
Yeah. But so to go back to the Christian basis for participating in the government, it's very clear Old and New Testament were supposed to be involved. But even the founding fathers, when they created this country, so if we want to really quickly remember, we had a Declaration of Independence in 1776, fought a war for a couple of years, won, had a very difficult time getting the 13 colonies to cooperate as a nation. And so the Constitution came up at the end of the 1880s, 1888, 89. And so for 15 years or so, we had a country and it wasn't under our Constitution. Then we got the Constitution and we've been going forward since then with some amendments. But what they were struggling with in Philadelphia when they were trying to define what this form of government was going to be that they were calling the Constitution, they were trying to figure out how to let people be self-governed. We would not be like all the monarchies in Europe, where divine right of my son becomes the king, my son after him, blah, 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 that it was going to be based on selection by voting for the national government. And what's really critical that we've lost, and I'm only 65 next month, so I think it's pretty much been lost my whole life. I don't know when it happened. But what we really lost is this idea that I own the entire government, equal with everybody else, as if it was McDonald's.
Well,
hang on. So let's assume that McDonald's stock is traded on the Dow Jones Industrial or the S&P or whatever stock market for McDonald's, which it's not because they're individual franchises, right? But let's assume it is. And everybody that has one share gets one vote. If you buy 2 shares, you get 2 votes. If you buy 1 million shares, you get 1 million votes. And that's the way those organizations are run. But this country, it's only 1 share per human. That's a legally authorized voting citizen. So we own it equally. Every one of us that can legally vote, because we're old enough, we haven't been disqualified by our conduct, and we're still alive, are legally entitled to vote. and we each only get one vote. So we actually own an equal share of this country and government as every other citizen. Nobody owns more than anybody else.
Well, it's interesting because, you always give that example of the neighbor's truck, right? You talk about that.
I didn't today, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. For those of you that want to know what I'm talking about, go back and watch some of our early shows because Jim brings it up like every other show. So at some point you talk about that. But here's what I'm beginning to, as I'm talking to people, because I'm out there all the time talking to people about this show because I want this show to grow. So I need you to like, subscribe, share this video with all of your friends. And if those of you listening on the radio, if you like it, tell people about the show, because I think that Jim and I spend a lot of time not only learning about these issues, but we,
sure.
I can speak for myself, and I'm pretty sure I could speak for Jim that I spend time in prayer because
Sure.
I want to seek what the Lord wants us to talk about. So it's really important to us that the show grows. But anyway, as I'm sharing and talking to people about the show and I bring up that example, they laugh and they go, yeah, but what happens when that truck is, it's falling apart, it doesn't work, it would cost a lot of money to fix. So
that's what we have right now, because and that's how we treat it.
And that's why people, I think, sometimes are hesitant to weigh in on these issues. Like when you and I were pushing people to comment on the Title IX rules, which we are gonna talk about these missing comments. But I think that people are people are fed up. They're tired of speaking when no one is listening. They're tired of waking all of these hours trying to encourage friends, and pastors are tired of preaching to people who get mad. And, well, I don't like you preaching on that issue, pastor, so I'm not going to give money this month. I mean, this is the reality of what people are facing today.
Yes.
And then, or their family members. And we're going to talk on the next show about all of this hate that is directed toward people of faith in every avenue now. And it's getting worse and worse and worse, to even where Congress people are encouraging people to attack other people. We are in a civilization right now where if we don't get into a fight, then we've wasted precious moments, right? So you have people at the dinner table, Jim, that's arguing about these issues. You've got people that are defending this president and defending that president. You've got people in jail because they believe this, and you've got other people not in jail for something they did when
Worse.
Other people that have done stuff are not in jail. You've got media people that are spending all of their time using the media to spew out their political beliefs. And you've got people that don't have time to sift through all of the misinformation that's out there. So when we ask people to weigh in on Title IX comments, and they do, and then all of a sudden 160,000 of these comments go missing.
And it's about a little bit less than half, because it was 390,000 total and 160 went missing.
Yeah.
So it's almost half.
So
and the thing is, when the Biden administration is asked about it, they're like, oh, well, one caused a problem and it deleted 160 that were exactly the same. I mean, how do they even know that?
You know what? The Heritage Foundation did a really good presentation about a week ago, and I'm going to put that link below so that people can watch it. And I forget the name of the lady that did the presentation, but she is an attorney and she fights for civil rights. So she's pretty popular. She talks about some of the cases she did. But when she talked about this Title IX thing, it came up in the Q&A. So for people that want to hear just this section, you can fast forward and just go to the Q&A at the end, because she dealt with the Title IX. And she said, people aren't even aware, and I know that this is gonna stir you because I know you think this way too. She said, people are unaware that Congress is not doing their job. Instead of writing law, yes. So instead of writing law, which is why they get elected, right? This is what she said. They get elected because their job is to create law. That's what they're elected to do.
Correct.
What they do is they pass a law and then toss it to some government agency to run.
It's called the administrative state.
And
correct.
She said that what people don't know is there are hundreds and hundreds. She said no one knows the exact amount either of how many of these administrative offices are actually doing Congress's job. And she used Title IX as an example because she said, we forget that Title IX was just a paragraph. Title IX was just a paragraph. And that Title IX paragraph says this: no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal assistance. That was it. That was
That's
Title
the way
IX.
Congress used to write laws.
Yes.
In the 70s.
But then they tossed okay, so how are we going to apply this Title IX? Well, we need the Department of Justice to do this, and we need the Education Department to do this. And so what happens is these regulations get developed on how to apply Title IX.
Correct.
And that's where we get lost in the weeds.
And that was the rules that we were putting our comments
Yes,
in on. But I would rather have a one-paragraph statute than a 6,000-page statute.
Well, and that's what she's saying. She's saying that, like, Obamacare is a good example of that.
Yes.
Right? So when you look at how our founding fathers built the Constitution, they never intended for all this bureaucracy that has been built up over all the years. And if we could bring our founding fathers back just for a day, they would not recognize the very country they helped.
So at the time of the founding fathers, this using experts to run society was an option they rejected.
That's what I mean. So I'm going to put a little teaser out there for those of you watching and listening. Jim doesn't even know this. So you all are hearing this at the exact same time that Jim is hearing this.
Uh-oh.
I'm working on developing a 6-week series on the Constitution and how that applies to today.
Oh, you went to law school, did you?
We are going to be talking about that. And I think that for people in this country, especially our kids in college and our kids in high school and in middle school, they're not learning civics the way that they did before.
That's true. But you don't have to work on one because there's a whole bunch of good ones.
My ideas are beyond.
Are you doing School of Rock kind?
Well, it's going to be even better than school. No, it's going to be applicable for people that live in Hawaii, because I want people to understand, because we in Hawaii, we say this all the time. We look at things a little differently than the mainland does, right? So I want people.
You know how come? Sun always in our eyes.
Don't get me started, because you and I are going to have cracks right now. Okay, so anyway, I think that what's important is, again, that we have to instill in our kids, in our pastors, in our families, a love for the Constitution, and not to beat each other over the head with all of this negativity.
I agree 100%.
Okay, so anyway, so we had this one paragraph that has now been, this regulations that people were commenting on was hundreds and hundreds of pages long.
But let's let people remember that the content of the new regulations is very different from the intention of that Title IX paragraph.
Exactly.
Because the Title IX paragraph was talking about females in education getting exactly the same opportunities as males, because in the 70s, when that was passed, that was a lingering issue. What these new regulations under the Biden administration are doing are going back to the version that Obama created through executive order before President Trump got rid of the executive order. And basically what it's saying is gender identity and expression is included in the definition of sex from the 70s in that 1970s Title IX. And that is very different than the intention.
Now, I don't normally promote Saturday Night Live, but I sent you that clip that Saturday Night Live did, this hilarious clip. I'll try to find it and put it in the link on a bill. What they did is
how a bill doesn't become the law.
They took Schoolhouse's Rock's thing about a bill, how a bill becomes law, and they tossed it into how a bill gets tossed down the stairs because of an executive order. It is hilarious. So if you have not seen that, you got to look for that. It's a Saturday Night Live. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. It's hilarious.
So why don't we do this? Why don't you talk about the missing public comments and get that stuff out so that you've accomplished that part of this. And then we're going to talk about kind of the 30,000-foot view of what that kind of stuff does, how it affects participation in government.
Okay, so the first article that Jim and I looked at was the Daily Signal's article that's entitled "Biden Education Department Declines to Explain 160,000 Missing," and they have that in quotes, public comments on redefining sex in Title IX. And in the article, they go on to say, basically the article states that they're just absolutely appalled that they're getting absolutely no explanation from the government about that. But they do refer to a Politico article that came out saying that it was actually a mistake because according to Politico, they were saying that
and just so that we know, Politico is kind of a friend of the administration. It's not an adversary of the administration.
Right. So, and we try to do that. We try to look at all sources, right? So anyway, this was the comment from Politico. Clerical error in Title IX comment count. Wondering why the number of comments on the Biden administration's Title IX rule dropped from 349, 177 comments on Tuesday? The department found a clerical error with a comment unrelated to the proposed regulation that boosted it by about 200,000 comments.
But they don't explain how that could happen.
They absolutely don't. And you and I were talking before the show that I think what is frustrating to people is that something, and it does seem to fall along political lines, whoever's in office. Certain things are an issue based on a political party's line of control, and other things are not. And right now, with the way that our government is being run, this didn't seem to be important to them, but it goes to trust in the government when already there's a major distrust in the government.
Well, and before we get to that, because that's something I really want to talk about, what is the purpose of making these comments? So the Administrative Procedures Act, which is a law Congress passed a long, long time ago to govern how these administrative agencies are allowed to make rules and change rules, it requires that if a change to a rule or if a new rule is proposed by the agency, they have to publish in the Federal Register, which is a daily federal government publication that is where everybody goes for new information from the government. They have to publish the proposed text with instructions of where and when and how to make comments, because after the comment period ends, the agency is required to review all the comments and incorporate the comments as they think is appropriate into final regulations, final rules. And so if the purpose is to help make the rules, why is the agency discarding 160,000 comments? Because they don't like them? And one thing that I didn't understand about the Politico description from the Department of Education, that a, quote, clerical error, which is like a typo. I don't know what a clerical error is. They didn't say typo. They said clerical error with one comment. So there was one comment out of 160,000 that had a clerical error in it, boosted the count by more than 200,000. Without explaining that, that makes no sense to me.
Well, even the math doesn't work because they're saying that okay, so there were 349,000 total comments, right? They're saying one bad comment, which added 200,000 comments, but they only removed 169.
But the thing is the clerical error some kind of a programming hack?
It could be.
Why did they call that a clerical error? So if they had a hack, they should have used that word instead.
Well, no, I don't think that necessarily from what I read that it was a hack. I think that it might have been somebody as they're inputted something that, because when you're loading these up, if you're thinking technology wise, the way these things work, right? You go online, you click on the link, you upload in some cases, you upload your comment if Correct. You're doing it in Word or PDF, right? But you can also just type in the block, fill in the block.
Right.
And so what could have happened is some person accidentally clicked on that link to type in something that had nothing to do with this. But in my and you know that I think technology wise, right? I mean,
way more than I do. I'm listening.
I mean, I love this, right? So I'm trying to process in my brain how if I upload a document, that should not affect anything because it's just one document that was uploaded. Now, if I type into this block and I type something wrong, again,
it's still only one.
It's still only one unless it was a bot. And for those of you listening that know what a bot is, maybe somebody created a bot so that there were constant good comments going in or constant bad comments going in, because that would trigger any any online thing that there's a problem.
That's not a clerical error. That's a hack thing.
No, but it might originally started as a clerical. I don't know. You're right. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I agree with you. But I mean, I really was trying, because you know that I think differently than you. I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. But even in this circumstance, Jim, I cannot give them the benefit of the doubt. It makes absolutely no sense to me. And when I looked at, this is the website for Ed Week, right? Because there's an education week, right? So again, this isn't necessarily a conservative site. Okay, I would assume this is probably a progressive
I
site.
don't know.
They went off about these missing this missing comments, and according to this, what they wrote about it, it sounded like there were way more comments opposed to the changes than there were supporting it. And they actually mentioned the Family Policy Alliance. This is a direct quote from the article. Many of the comments were identical to each other and written by groups like American Family Association and the Family Policy Alliance, both anti-LGBTQ nonprofit organizations, which urge commenters to, quote, stop Biden's LGBT agenda in schools, end quote.
And so based on that, they're going to kick out 160,000 valid people's positions? It's wrong.
Well, yeah. And then the article goes on to say that it looked like, and you know what? I got to be honest with this. Even when we're sending out alerts during the legislative session, we try to encourage people to make the comments their own. So we will tell them why a bill is bad, but we don't want you to just copy and paste our comments and submit them, because again, going back to your comment that you own the government, you have a voice.
Correct.
You might speak with a local accent. Maybe you are a doctor or a lawyer, and you should speak to your legislative.
That's true. But I want to get to the next point, because we're down to under 3 minutes.
Absolutely.
And so in September, the Harvard CAPS Harris poll did a survey of 1,885 people, September 7th and 8th, 2022. They were all registered voters. And they were asking about President Biden's recent narrative where he said the MAGA people are extremists that pose a great threat to the foundations of our republic. The reason I want to talk about this is related to this $160,000 lost comments, related to an unnecessary Mueller investigation, all these things, the failure to investigate Hillary, that this federal government is doing to people it doesn't like. So it's very interesting. 54% believe that the statement is a gross exaggeration, but 46% believe there are tens of millions of dangerous MAGA Republicans in our country, okay? 58% of voters expressed the belief that Biden is raising issues around MAGA to distract from his poor leadership. That's almost 60%. 59%, which is closer to 60%, say they believe Biden is attempting to avoid talking about key issues, while 41%, which is almost half, said that Biden is fairly raising MAGA Republican issues. So what I'm trying to say is the split in what's right and what's wrong in this country is pretty close to 50-50. According to this, on this issue, it's 60-40. That is not how this country is supposed to work. That is not how we're supposed to own the government, by letting these people speak for us who don't hold our views because it's easier than us taking our responsibility. But go ahead and close this out.
Well, and, you know, we want to leave you with this. If the person that's in public office isn't the one you voted for and isn't the one that you supported, you still have a right and a duty to raise your voice to that individual. You need to build relationships with the president. And I don't mean go to lunch or whatever with him, but I mean, you should be contacting him because they make it very easy. You can go to the presidential website and send him a comment. You should know your senator and your representative on the congressional level. And when they send you those form letter responses, and many of you bring that to my attention, you guys send me the copies and it's the same letter. They just changed the name. You have every right to call that office and say, thank you for that response, but I need to discuss this further with you. You have a right to do that. But remember, they work for you. They work for you, not the other way around. And same for your state representatives and senators and governor and lieutenant governor. All of these are public servants that work for you. So you need to raise your voice. Like, subscribe, share, and stay tuned to this show, because next week, Jim and I are going to be talking about hate crimes against religious groups. So you want to be there for that. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.